entirely illegal under international law, since Iran had not attacked either country with a nuclear weapon, did not possess one, and wasn't threatening to imminently attack either country. And indeed, both the US intelligence and the International Atomic Energy Agency had assessed that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon, and Iran had been engaged in talks with the US over its nuclear program at the time of the Israeli attack. And in addition, striking nuclear installations is explicitly banned under international law and risks causing radioactive contamination harmful to human health and the environment. And of course, there's also local restrictions on launching that kind of action without getting congressional approval. By contrast, Israel is the only country in the Middle East with nuclear weapons, and it has never subjected itself to international inspections. And I think you could argue that Israel's possession of nuclear weapons has emboldened it to carry out the actions it is engaging in Gaza and to attack other countries in the region, not only Iran, but also Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. We've also seen in the context of the war in Ukraine how nuclear weapons have been used to coerce and intimidate. So the attacks on Iran were not only illegal, but also counterproductive because they undermine international efforts to prevent the further proliferation of nuclear weapons. Now, Iran has made a decision to suspend international inspections of its nuclear facilities, and we really do hope that it does not decide to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and build a nuclear weapon. And so it's really clear that military action against Iran is not the way to resolve concerns over Tehran's nuclear program. You can't bomb your way to nuclear non-proliferation and security. It's got to be done through negotiated agreements like the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that Iran was complying with until President Trump withdrew from it in his first term. The US should have continued to pursue the diplomatic process underway before Israel resorted to the illegal use of force. This does not make the region or the world safer. It makes it more dangerous. And I think these events also expose the double standards inherent around nuclear weapons, as Tad mentioned. Here you had two countries that have nuclear weapons attacking another country that does not, at this stage, have nuclear weapons. And as former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has said, there are no right hands for wrong weapons. So our campaign is based on the need to eliminate nuclear weapons, and we're focused on the weapons rather than the countries, and to say that the weapons are banned under international law and no country has the right to have those weapons because they pose an existential threat to the entire international community. Because nuclear weapons are the only devices ever created by humans that have the capacity to destroy all complex life on Earth. And the latest science, as reported in the Nature Food Journal in 2022, confirms that even a limited nuclear war, say between India and Pakistan, using only a small fraction of the world's nuclear arsenal, would not only kill millions of people outright through blast burns and radiation, but it would also cause global climate disruption from firestorms that would send enormous amounts of soot into the stratosphere, would circle the globe, blocking out sunlight and causing agricultural collapse, and then the death of more than 2 billion people in a nuclear winter through starvation. And a major nuclear war, say between the US and Russia, would mean the end of human civilization and most other life forms. So nuclear weapons are an issue for the collective security of humanity, and they should not be dealt with as the national security prerogative of a select few countries. And as I mentioned, ICAN is here in the US to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Trinity detonation. Nuclear weapons were created here in the US, and their first victims were Americans. And the Trinity explosion was just the beginning. It led to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that killed 250,000 people and harmed many more. And those bombs would today be described as tactical nuclear weapons, because bombs today are very, very large indeed. And of course, then there were more than 2,000 nuclear weapons explosions carried out around the world on defenseless communities after Trinity. And these so-called tests inflicted catastrophic harm, mostly on Indigenous, colonised and vulnerable communities and their environments, without consent, without information. And these were not scientific experiments. They were acts of violence that left intergenerational trauma and radioactive contamination in their wake. Here in the US, while survivors have been fighting for basic recognition and health care, the US is spending over $1.5 trillion on nuclear weapons modernization. And the Sentinel ICBM program alone is projected to cost more than $130 billion, and that is before the inevitable overruns. As the Federation of American Scientists has shown, this program offers no meaningful increase in security. It risks a new global arms race and diverts critical funds away from healthcare, housing, and environmental action. So, for example, New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the US, despite billions going annually into nuclear weapons research, development, and production and waste management. And this money does not go into the local community. It takes away from other potential industries that could bring benefits to the community. And every dollar spent on nuclear weapons is a dollar not spent on social programs, infrastructure, healthcare, education, clean water, and environmental protection. And it really is there's a necessity for a fundamental reallocation of resources from destructive capacity to constructive potential. Even President Ronald Reagan recognized that nuclear weapons are totally irrational, totally inhumane, good for nothing but killing, and possibly destructive of life on Earth, which is why he and President Gorbachev agreed in the late 1980s to massively reduce the number of nuclear weapons on the planet, and they almost agreed to eliminate them altogether. And it's time now to finish the job, and that is what our campaign is all about. It's not about arms reduction or arms control per se. It's about the total abolition of nuclear weapons. And that is because, for as long as nuclear weapons remain anywhere, as long as any state has nuclear weapons, others will want them. So nuclear weapons possession encourages proliferation. Two, so long as nuclear weapons remain anywhere, they are bound one day to be used, whether by design, intentionally, or by accident, or by miscalculation, or unhinged leader, or a terrorist group, or a cyber attack, simple mistake. And so, and we know that there have been many nuclear near misses and accidents involving nuclear weapons over the decades that could have ended in global catastrophe, but for sheer dumb luck. And as the Secretary General of the United Nations has said, when it comes to nuclear weapons, luck is not a strategy, and we cannot rely upon luck to last indefinitely. And thirdly, any use of nuclear weapons will have catastrophic consequences, as we know from experiences in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and from the communities impacted by the more than 2,000 nuclear weapons explosions carried out around the world. And fourthly, and I'll come to this a bit later, deterrence is a dangerous myth that endangers the whole world. And the fifth message is that disarmament is achievable, that of all the global challenges we face, this one is the least complex. Humans built nuclear weapons and humans can dismantle them. All it requires is political will and leadership. And that is what our campaign is all about. It's creating that public and political will to eliminate nuclear weapons. So what is ICAN? We are a global civil society movement made up of hundreds of partner organisations around the world. It was a movement born in Australia in 2007, but now headquartered in Geneva. And just 10 years after starting this campaign, it, as Tad mentioned, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for its work highlighting the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and for helping to get a new UN treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons adopted at the UN with the support of 122 countries. For decades, the narrative around nuclear weapons was controlled primarily by those who have them. And their message has been framed in deliberately abstract terms such as nuclear weapons provide stability and security and deterrence works. And so ICAN sought to show the real security impact of nuclear weapons by highlighting the incontrovertible evidence from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, from their more than 2,000 nuclear weapons explosions, from Algeria to Australia and Kazakhstan to Kiribati and Nevada to Marshall Islands and French Polynesia, that nuclear weapons cause indiscriminate, catastrophic harm to humans and the environment across long periods of time and vast distances. And it was the powerful testimonies from around the globe of nuclear survivors that helped to create the momentum for the new treaty, which is really a game changer for nuclear disarmament, which had been stalled for decades. The TPNW, as it's called, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, comprehensively prohibits nuclear weapons, and it provides a pathway under international law for nuclear armed states to disarm in a time-bound, verifiable manner. And so, Tad, I would say to you that we don't need a convention on nuclear weapons because we have already a treaty that provides what is needed for disarmament. And it's also the first multilateral treaty to provide victim assistance and environmental remediation for communities impacted by nuclear weapons use and testing. It has a scientific advisory group, an agenda stream. It acknowledges the disproportionate impact of nuclear weapons on women and girls and on Indigenous peoples. So it's not only a disarmament treaty, it's also a human rights and environment and feminist treaty. And it's an investment in international law and in multilateralism at a time when these things are increasingly under threat. And it is democratizing the nuclear weapons debate by taking it out of the hands of the UN Security Council Permanent Five, all nuclear armed states, and bringing it to the General Assembly where every country has an equal vote. And at the moment, half the world's governments have signed up to the treaty, and we're expecting imminently more countries to join. And I'll let Seth in a moment talk about some of the ways that ICAN works to raise public and political awareness about the risks and consequences of nuclear weapons and to encourage countries to join the TPNW. But just before that, I want to note that the nuclear armed states and their allies often try to portray the TPNW as a soft humanitarian approach that's not based on real security. But the reality is the reverse. Looking at humanitarian and environmental consequences is very much security. The wholesale destruction of infrastructure, the economy, and the environment, millions of people dying of blast, burns, and radiation, and billions dying of starvation in a nuclear winter is very much security. And we put it back to them. The more important question is how sustainable is a security approach that is based on nuclear weapons, any use of which is not only genocidal, but also suicidal. And of course, we know that you don't even have to use nuclear weapons for them to be harmful. Of course, if someone walks into, holds up a bank or a petrol station with a gun, that is an assault, even if the gun is never fired. In the same way, the possession of nuclear weapons is a constant threat to the entire world, even if it's not exploded. The only other global policy issue remotely comparable in terms of its planetary impact is the environment crisis. But nuclear bombs will kill us and the environment a lot faster. And as I mentioned, so long as any nuclear weapons remain anywhere, they are bound one day to be used. And because we know that the risk of use of nuclear weapons is not zero. And that means that if it's greater than zero, it will happen. And there are scientists who estimated that the risk of use of nuclear weapons at a time of high tension, such as now, is around 1% per annum, which doesn't sound very much. But then when you think about it, would you get on a plane if you knew it had a 1 in 100 chance of crashing? Would you buy a lottery ticket if you were told that you had a 1 in 100 chance of winning? I mean, that would be pretty good odds actually compared to most lotteries. So, a low probability event combined with catastrophic consequences on a risk assessment matrix still leaves you with a high risk that has to be managed. And at the moment, this is not being managed, but in fact, deterrence is only exacerbating and increasing the risk. Let me just see. I've talked about the fact that we've survived so far by sheer dumb luck. And I want to just mention the theory of nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence, to be credible, is based on a nuclear armed state's readiness and willingness to indiscriminately kill millions of innocent people in violation of international law. Nobel Peace laureate Joseph Rotblat, one of the early scientists working on the Manhattan Project, who quit the Manhattan Project for moral reasons, was the only one to do so, and then campaigned against nuclear weapons, described nuclear deterrence as the ultimate form of terrorism. And the states that have joined the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons have identified nuclear deterrence as an obstacle to disarmament and an encouragement to proliferation. It relies on an assumption of 100% rationality and predictability by all actors, including one's enemies, 100% of the time. It assumes that each party has full knowledge of the other's intentions, and those are very bold assumptions to make. The increasing integration of artificial intelligence into the military, which is speeding up warfare and decreasing the time for nuclear decision making. And that only makes the situation much more uncertain. And as I mentioned, there are many things that actually can't be deterred, like accidents and miscalculations and unhinged leaders and cyber attacks, etc. And we know that even the use, we know this from war games that have shown again and again and again that even the use of just one nuclear weapon would have catastrophic consequences. That there's actually no such thing as a limited nuclear war because there's an almost escalatory exchange of nuclear weapons. And this is set out really clearly in US journalist Annie Jacobson's book, Nuclear War, A Scenario. It's excellent. I recommend that everyone reads it. It basically goes second by second, minute by minute, as to just the firing of one nuclear weapon and how that leads to this escalatory exchange. And you see how you go from situation normal to the end of the world in 72 minutes. And it's all based on meticulous research and facts. Denis Villeneuve, the director of the Dune movies, is going to make a film on this based on this book next year. So
Oh, I hadn't heard that. Oh, that's good
yeah,
news.
so I think that will actually create a lot of interest, and as it should. So you may well have heard that in January this year, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which was started by Einstein and Oppenheimer back in 1947, and every year there's an annual assessment by scientists as to how close humanity is to global catastrophe, represented by midnight. Well, this year they moved the hands of the doomsday clock to forward to 89 seconds to midnight, the closest we've ever been to global catastrophe. Of course, that was even before the
So,
India-Pakistan confrontation and the Iran-Israel-US events. And so, we're really at a time when the risk of use of nuclear weapons has never been higher. And the rhetoric, the nuclear threats and rhetoric has also, even at, very senior political levels has never, it's been quite extreme. And so, I think we're at a fork in the road, humanity. We can continue down this path of increasing confrontation and militarization and proliferation, or we can take a different path. We can choose a different path of dialogue, diplomacy, and disarmament, because, the alternative is a one-way downward spiral to annihilation. And the dinosaurs didn't have the option to avoid the asteroid that made them extinct. But nuclear weapons are not a part of the natural world that we're doomed to suffer. We actually have a choice. We can choose to eliminate the existential risk by eliminating the weapons. So far, it is civil society and the countries that have joined the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons who are showing the leadership that's necessary. Um, Um, and I think in this 80th anniversary year of the first uses of nuclear weapons in New Mexico and Japan, it's time to put an end to these doomsday devices and for every country to join this UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I really believe that the abolition of nuclear weapons is a moral and legal frontier as significant as the abolition of slavery or the recognition of universal human rights. And this is something that, it's not utopian, it's existential. And so it needs to be reframed as a global security imperative. And it's about common security and not mutual destruction. And I think I'll leave it there and look forward to questions and hand over to Seth to talk about what you can do as part of this campaign to eliminate nuclear weapons and anything else that you want to say, Seth.
well, let me just say, Melissa, thank you so much for there was so much substance there. I just want to quickly say two things really struck me that it's a 12-day war and people move on, and arguably people haven't thought all that much about the nuclear peril since 1989 or 1991, but you just so thoroughly reminded us that this is number one for all the great existential challenges facing the human race. This is the biggest one. This is the worst case scenario. This is the single thing. Climate's sort of in the same realm, but in a different way, that can bring about, as Jonathan Shelley used to say, not just genocide, but biocide and omnicide. So thank you so much for so eloquently reminding us of just what the stakes are. Seth, I don't want to constrain you too much, but I wanted it roughly around now at 5:45 to sort of open it up to things. So let us hear what you have to say, but let's try as quickly as we can to because there's a lot of people here who I know have a lot to say about their own visions and about maybe some questions about ICAN and the TPNW. So Seth, take it
Sure.
away and tell us
Thanks,
whatever you
Ted.
want to say, especially about things we can now do
Yeah,
along
I
these
mean,
lines.
I too am eager to hear what people want to ask and talk about. but happy also for the opportunity to perhaps, yeah, pick up where Melissa pointed me and to tell you about what you can do. And also just to pick up on the last thing that you said. And when I think about the great existential risks to humanity, I don't necessarily think of it as a competition. It's hard to say which is going to be the one that takes us to our final end. I think for me, the more powerful framing is the interconnectedness of it all. You spoke about climate and the great catastrophe of that might be looming with threats related to the environment. And you spoke about Jonathan Shell. Jonathan Shell, he also talked about both climate chaos and nuclear weapons as basically two sides of the same coin, essentially. And if you care about one, you need to care about the other. Both are the fruits of swollen power, as I think he phrased it. These are, as Melissa said, both solvable, but nuclear weapons all the more so. They're both like the environmental crisis created by humans, only within the power of humans to solve. But in the case of nuclear weapons, we are just talking about a limited number of countries and in fact, a limited number of corporations, I should even more pointedly say, that are holding us hostage and holding the rest of the world hostage based on their own greed and narrow-minded, myopic, and short-sighted framing of the world. So to talk about what we can do, we are, as Melissa also mentioned, a global campaign. We are more than 700 organizations in our network in 110 countries, and how they operate depends on the perspectives of their own governments and their own, fellow citizens. And that's the way we think as well. A lot of our advocacy is focused on the TPNW that Melissa introduced for us, both the treaty itself and getting countries and to join it, but also its norms. And that's where you come in. I mean, we're not just talking about getting the US to join this treaty. We are talking about using the treaty to help illustrate and stigmatize, help spread our own opposition to nuclear weapons and stigmatize them. It's not only about making nuclear weapons illegal, which is what is the fundamental core of the TPNW, but also about making them less relevant to our international and security policies. So if you can just take off our US-centric hats for one moment before we put them back on, just keep in mind, just to talk about how the treaty is doing in terms of governments adhering to it. At this moment, the vast majority of the world, two-thirds of the world's countries, has expressed support for the TPNW. And as of right now, we have exactly 98 countries which have either become states parties to the treaty or have signed it. So that's by UN math anyway, exactly half of the world's countries. The next one we get, which we will get in September, brings us to a global majority. So we're not talking about it much in the US. Perhaps for some of you, this is the first you're even hearing about it. But this is the legal framework for how we're going to get there, but also the normative framework that the rest of us can use on the way. So whether or not you believe that the US can join it, as I do, you would do well to believe that the US should join it as an initial matter. And that we must, because I, for one, believe that if we don't, that the end is inevitable and it will relate to nuclear weapons. And that's our job. We're not all lawmakers, but we are society. We set the standards for what's acceptable in our countries. Okay, so how can you do it? Wherever you are, whatever space you're working on, there's ways for you to join us. We have a whole menu of things you can do. And I first encourage you just to go to our website and check us out. It's ICANW.org. And then in all the socials, we are at Nuclear Ban. And in those countries that don't yet support the treaty, we have a range of initiatives that are helping bring people along. So we have, for example, the ICAN Cities Appeal, and your city may have already joined it, but if it hasn't, maybe you can help get your city to join it. And that's an initiative whereby cities in nuclear armed states, or we call them nuclear client states, like states that host nuclear weapons or claim protection from nuclear weapons, declare that they support the treaty, even if their national government does not. We've hundreds of cities that have so far joined it. Many capital cities from Paris to Washington, D.C., and that have joined it. My own city, New York City, has joined it. And it's a very powerful tool for us to basically show to the world and to our national governments that their citizens do not support nuclear weapons and want their country to join the TPNW. And nuclear weapons target cities, after all, most of all, and so shouldn't those citizens have a big voice? Similarly, we have something we call it the ICAN pledge, whereby our congresspeople for the U.S. or parliamentarians, can do something similar, where they say that even though their national government doesn't support the treaty, but they, as parliamentarians, will work to get their country to do so. Someone's asking for me to put in the website. Again, I'm just doing that. ICANW.org. So that's the parliamentary pledge, or the ICAN pledge. If you're at a university, maybe you're a professor or work at a university in some way. Maybe you're a graduate of a university, as many of us may be. You should check out our Schools of Mass Destruction report. It gives you the blueprint for finding out to what extent your school is involved in the nuclear weapons industry, and there's advocacy you can do about that. There's ways to get our money out of the nuclear weapons industry. ICAN has the blueprints for the entire financial structure to nuclear weapons, starting with who makes them, who pays for them, and how much we are spending on them. We just published our most recent report, the ICAN's nuclear weapons spending report, demonstrating that the world is now spending $100 billion on nuclear weapons, and the U.S. being the more than half of that. And then if you check out our Don't Bank on the Bomb report, that's the blueprint for finding out whether your banks, your pension funds, who's paying for that, and how to advocate to get your own money out of that, your city's money out of that. And there's a lot of initiatives that are being taken forward, all relating to the TPNW, because the TPNW makes it illegal to manufacture nuclear weapons, but also to assist with any of the prohibited activities. So that's a way to go after those who are investing in nuclear weapons activities in other ways as well. Maybe I'll stop with just those. I mean, there's, except to also add that we also have federal legislation that both a bill and a resolution that references the TPNW. In one case, there's the delegate Holmes Norton has a bill. I think it's HR 1888, maybe, that calls on the U.S. to sign the TPNW. So there's a lot of things you could do. And what you might first do, I would say, like I said, is go to our website, because there probably is a partner organization in your community. Because of our 700 plus partner organizations, we have like 60 plus of them are in the US. So you may find one there that you can join and take on local action with, and help us eliminate nuclear weapons together. Thanks.
Well, Seth, thank you so much to both you and Melissa for these both stirring words and the big picture. And I guess before we transition to more of an open conversation, I just want people to I urge people to not be constrained by what I call the ball and chain of PPP, present political possibility. Everything you talked about, Melissa and Seth, probably seems unlikely with Donald Trump and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth in charge. But they're not going to be there forever. And we're talking about we hope that we can achieve a lot of this, and we hope that we can get the United States and some of the other nuclear armed nations to actually sign on to the TPNW very soon. But I think it's important to think beyond just the present political possibilities of the moment and to really say this is the solution to the nuclear peril, and it's universal nuclear weapons abolition. And Melissa, I think you convinced me that maybe the Model Nuclear Weapons Convention that was so, this is a little inside baseball, that was so prominent in the 1990s can be fully replaced practically by this remarkable historical achievement of the TPNW. So I see it as 5:57, and we've got a good 33 minutes left, and could stay on a little bit longer. I at least can. So here's what I'd like to do. One of our board members, Dr. Nancy Naparko, is going to sort of call on people. Nancy, let me go ahead and call on John Seeley first, if I may, and then people can just raise their hands and have their say. Let me say two things. One, I'm calling on John Seeley, who's another board member of ADA, because I specifically asked him to speak for just a couple of minutes, specifically about what people can do here in the United States, not necessarily with regard to the TPNW, but more specifically with regard to these attacks on Iran and what might still unfold. So we're going to call on John first, and then people can raise their hands and get in line, and Dr. Naparko is going to call on them. But the one other thing I want to say before I zip it myself is try to keep it brief, folks, because we got a lot of people here and we're going to run out of time. But I am not one of these moderators who says you got to end with a question mark, and you're only allowed to ask questions. The people here are knowledgeable and passionate and politically engaged and care about the fate of the earth. And you can say whatever the heck you want. Please share your convictions and your passion with us, and let us know what you think we can do to bring about the kind of world we all want to create. John Seeley, I give it to you, and then Dr. Naparko, I turn it over to you to manage the queue.
Well, thank you, Tad. Thank you, Melissa and Seth, for a very deep and vital briefing. I'm not prepared in any way to discuss what we can do about the abolition of nuclear weapons. That's really not what I think is on the immediate agenda under the Trump and Putin regimes. I launched my political baby teeth to make some I cut my political baby teeth, with veterans of the CND, a campaign for nuclear disarmament in Britain, and also with the Canadians who were objecting to NORAD missiles, nuclear missiles being brought into their territory. That was 60 years ago. And I'm sort of at a loss to understand where people feel there's a mass base for anti-nuclear campaigns in general. Those two campaigns were, in response to the spread of nuclear weapons. When they went out of Holy Lock, we don't want Polaris, we don't want your nuclear submarines. So what I was I hope someone can speak to those issues, but that's not my department. I was hoping to, raise the question of what can we do to prevent further adventures like we had last week of bombing Iran. And I would hope that some of the speakers would comment on, how they feel that those bombs, Melissa did say, you can't bomb your way to nuclear weapons. I think this is good. I think what I should do, here's what I would say. Overall, the Republicans are in somewhat of a conflict because a lot of them are anti-interventionist, isolationist, supposedly anti-war. They don't want war in the Ukraine. They don't want wars in the Middle East. And yet 98% of their legislators will fall in line with Trump no matter what. Whatever can be done to encourage, the Rand Pauls and the few other dissenters. That's good. But most of us here are Democrats. I presume most of us live in Democratic districts. I think what I should, we've had a great gulf between the bold people like Ro Khanna and Jimmy Raskin and so on said it's inconstitutional and it's a risk of war, and all the people who zipped their lips and said, we stand with Israel, Iran is evil. I'm going to put in the chat some comments from some of the Congress people, and I hope that progressives will focus on the people who are apologists for Trump's militaristic misadventures, those Democrats, and tell them that that's not the way their constituents feel, and some of them are at risk of losing. I worked for last election, and Congress recently elected congressman, and now I find he's really just in this issue. The Biden just like the Democrat, and he's for Democrat things another point, but we can.
John, your microphone's cutting out.
Yeah, I'm not hearing John either.
Are you hearing me?
Only a bit, John. I'm sorry. Only a bit.
I'll use that.
We got most of it, and
chat for
please, yes. And this is a very crucial point. You work to get somebody like George Whiteside's elected, a purple district, and we flipped it blue, and then he just lines up with this, pro bombing. So I am equally disturbed by that.
Yeah.
And I think your message that we should target, I don't mean try to kick them out of office, but let those kinds of members of Congress know that we're not happy with applauding trying to bomb our way to nuclear safety.
Well, and that they may be at great risk of losing a lot of support come next election.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you.
Thanks very much, my fellow board member, John Seeley.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's move on to Jane.
Well, I just wanted to say, on the one hand, if Seth or Melissa have any response to that, please do. But I definitely, Melissa and Seth, don't want to feel like the three of us need to respond to everything that people have to say. If we do, we do. If we don't, let's let people have their say. And Dr. Naparko, you're in charge.
I don't see that our guests want to comment. Jane, Shevstov.
Yes, thank you. I have some technical questions about the TPNW. In particular, what are the enforcement mechanisms? And does it put any kind of alternative security system in place?
I would like Seth or Melissa to take a crack at that. This is Dr. Jane Shevtsov, who is my frequent co-author, among other things, regarding our stuff, Melissa, regarding reinventing the United Nations. Seth, Melissa, would you like to take a crack at the question that Jane just asked?
I missed the first part of the question. I heard that, does it put any other security mechanisms in place? What was the first part? Was
enforcement.
Right.
Are there enforcement provisions? Is that fair, Jane?
Yes.
Yeah. So as many people would know, I suppose about, when it comes to disarmament treaties, there isn't there isn't a jail that we put some of the transgressors in. There isn't a mechanism by which there is a way to penalize a country in a direct way. Rather, it's all based on the multilateral world order by which the countries that are part of the treaty, which needs a threshold number of countries to belong to it before it can actually exist in the first place, are then able to deal with transgressions in a collective fashion that does not involve force. That is the aspiration of the disarmament treaty in the first place. And I think that sometimes, especially, I think a lot of us who are based in the U.S. have a way of thinking about that quite critically in the sense of like, well, then how does that work? And I think that we have to rely on the fact that by building a uh, a multilateral order where the cooperation is necessary on so many fronts to accomplish anything, and that it largely does work. And we have seen with other disarmament treaties that it has worked, largely to basically make these weapons unacceptable, and not just their use, but also their possession, and disincentivize people from using them. That's generally the history of the post-World War II world. Now, that's not to say that there aren't still mechanisms for at least verification, and that's where and there's a question in the chat about this about the IEA, and there will be there are robust verification provisions in the TPNW that are they have yet to be fully actionized, but we're in the early stages of implementing the TPNW in the first place to build in verification mechanisms and inspection systems, safeguards that will help identify the transgressions if they were to occur, so that countries can then respond to them. And yeah, that's the system that we have that we are building. And now I forgot the second part of the question all of a sudden. It was, what was it again? Sorry.
Is there anything in the treaty about building an alternative security system?
Right. I mean, the treaty is entirely about building an alternative security system because it's fundamental to the treaty that we are building a system that's based on international humanitarian law, human rights law, and a collective security that does not rely on threatening mass murder in order to get what we want. So yeah, that's the alternative system, and it works in the framework of other UN treaties. It is complementary to and reinforces the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and together builds a fabric of a framework that is meant to be the antidote and the alternative to the very dangerous system that we have in this moment. Can I also just, as long as I have the floor, just respond to something that John said in the prior question, if you don't mind? Because
Please.
I think that it is a fascinating question, as you said, Tad, and I think a really important one about, how do we prevent further illegal actions and dangerous escalations like we have seen in Iran? And I do think, and I think you were kind of getting to this, but I just want to hit it a little harder, if you will. I think that the answer may necessitate embracing some of the people on the other side of the political world that a lot of us are in this Zoom anyway. I think that some of the opposition from the Republican side is quite crucial to getting to building a framework to in the U.S. push back against some of the horribleness that we're seeing. I think that strange bedfellows must be made in this moment. I think we've seen it, in the hundreds and hundreds of pages of the Reconciliation Act that was adopted, the terrible bill that was adopted last week. Some of us may have not noticed that there was a section of it that addressed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And it was a huge win for progressives and those of us who have been campaigning for compensation to victims of U.S. nuclear weapons testing that Melissa outlined at the beginning. And it doesn't go far enough, but it massively expands and extends the opportunity for people who have been affected by nuclear weapons use in the U.S. to be compensated. And this is something that was pushed largely by Republicans, really. I mean, they working for their constituents, because a lot of those relevant states are Republican. And I think so. What's interesting about John's question to me is it highlights to me some of the folly sometimes as framing nuclear disarmament as only something progressives can do, when in fact, we did see historically in the U.S. that much of the progress that has been made, was made under Reagan. That's when we eliminated the most nuclear weapons in our history. And we don't have to be fans of all of the policies or even any other of the policies of any of these these adversaries, I would say, in some other context, to be allies in this one, I think. And because this does not need to be a partisan issue. I mean, Obama himself, who won the Nobel Prize himself for something he said he would do around eliminating nuclear weapons, and did not do so. In fact, he is responsible for building the $1.5+ trillion modernization program that was first adopted under him and has only been continued under the subsequent Trump and Biden administrations. So I think that we need to take a strong look at ourselves as progressives when we think about what we're asking for, and look for opportunities to, although I agree with you, Tad, that as you said, it's unlikely that Trump or Hegseth is going to just take us toward this treaty, but that we shouldn't reject some of the things they have said around the urgency of nuclear disarmament. I think we need to look at that as opportunities to build coalitions even in unlikely places. Thanks.
Seth, thank you. I want to turn it back over to you, Dr. Naparko. But forgive me, Seth, I want to say you are right that so much progress was made in the nuclear disarmament, or at least a curtailment realm, during the Reagan years. The second Reagan administration, 85 to 89, was radically different from the first Reagan administration, 81 to 85. But I want to I don't really mean it as a but let me remind all of us that one of the main things that generated that was we marching in the streets. June 12th, 1982, the Nuclear Freeze Rally in Central Park, and there was a big one out here in Los Angeles as well. It still might be the biggest single political demonstration in American history. I know it was for a long time. And that should give us hope, in the same way that progressives, I think in that case, marched in the streets and significantly moved the Reagan administration. Who knows, Seth and John? Maybe we can move the Trump administration in the same way, on some fronts, including on this front. Nancy, do you want to go ahead and take the gavel again? And poor
Sure.
Betty Kissel
Betty
out there
Kissel
has
up.
been very patient.
Yes,
Thank you, Betty.
she's been patient. Go ahead, Betty.
Oh, I thought you were going to speak. Hearing Seth mention coalition, and I think Melissa talked about like the interconnection of so many issues that are being raised. I'd like to ask if any of you have heard of the ecocide movement, working to make ecocide illegal. And I don't know, it sure seems to me like using a nuclear weapon would be a pretty darn good case for ecocide. So I'm wondering if some kind of coalition, kind of putting everyone's heads together, because the Ecocide International is doing great work and making great strides in that. So do you see any kind of coalition or connecting goals?
Let me just say, jump in here and say, yes, absolutely. I think as Seth alluded to, nuclear weapons are not separate from other global issues, but deeply interconnected with issues of the environment, of health, of human rights, of food security and colonialism and racism. I mean, just an example of how these issues all coalesce in one place. The US conducted 67 nuclear explosions in the Marshall Islands, and one of the and deposited. I mean, that caused an incredible amount of harm to the Marshall Islanders, who were basically guinea pigs in these experiments, as records from the Department of Energy have subsequently shown. And many of those people were evacuated or not evacuated from their atolls until after the explosions, and have been permanently displaced, can't practice their traditional cultures, can't eat their traditional foods because the marine environment's all contaminated. There's the Runit Dome that the US, where the US deposited the equivalent of 35 Olympic swimming pools worth of radioactive nuclear waste in the crater of a nuclear, where there'd been a nuclear explosion. Didn't line it. It covered it over with the concrete dome, which is cracking, and with sea level rising, with climate change, you've got an environmental disaster happening, a further environmental disaster happening on top of everything else. And as we heard today at a conference from a nuclear scientist, that in fact that disaster's been happening since the 70s, since the crater wasn't lined. So there's been that radioactive waste going into the ocean from the very beginning, not just now with the sea level rising. And so that's a very clear example of how all these issues are coming together in one place. The birth defects, the intergenerational cancers, and I think ecocide is a very apt word to use when you're looking at the harms that nuclear weapons cause. And that's one of the things we're doing with our campaign, is to try to connect movements, the biodiversity campaigns, the climate campaigns, and campaigns for democracy, and because we're building grassroots action from the ground up, it's all of those things coming together. And the other thing I want to mention, since I've noticed that Canon Hersey is with us, is who's the grandson of John Hersey, the author of
Melissa, you're stealing my thunder. That's the special guest. But go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say that artists are such an important part of this campaign. We know, Ronald Reagan's diary showed that he was very affected by watching the film The Day After. We can see how pop culture and art can actually have such a big impact on community and people's perception of an issue. And we've had this amazing project with Canon and his team, whereby the tricycle that's in the Hiroshima Museum, Shinichi's tricycle, he was a 3-year-old boy riding his tricycle at the time of the Hiroshima bombing, who was critically injured in that explosion, and then and died a few hours later. Was buried with his tricycle by his family in the backyard, and then later the family decided to move his remains to another location, and then they donated the tricycle to the Hiroshima Peace Museum. Well, there's now an artistic sculptural representation of that tricycle in the Geneva International Red Cross Museum, and it's incredible. It's incredibly impactful, because the original, we had the mayor of Hiroshima coming to see the sculpture in the Red Cross Museum in Geneva, and saying that it would be even more impactful than the original tricycle in Hiroshima, because that tricycle is in a glass case. and for its protection, but people can't get really close to it. Whereas the one in Geneva is in the open, and it's this it's so, it's so clear that there's, that the child is missing, and it says so much, and I should just shut up and let the actual artist speak to his work. So,
Well, thank you, Melissa.
hand
It's
over
really
to you.
special to see you here and to hear you and Seth, really bring to the table pathways to nuclear abolishment in this time. It's something that, my grandfather only could imagine as he walked the rubble of Hiroshima 8 months after the atomic bomb and became friends with Kiyoshi Tanimoto, with Hibakusha, the famous peace reverend of Hiroshima, and found a way to tell the story, the human story of those that suffered the atomic blast. I'll say that when my grandfather returned 40 years after the atomic bomb, around that time, Tad, you were talking about, when the movement was so big for the end of nuclear weapons
Yeah,
in
that would
the
be
80s.
85.
And he revisited Hiroshima, and walking through the Peace Park, he said he could imagine it like yesterday, the rubble of the atomic bomb and what it had been like in May of 1946. And revisiting that place, he couldn't help but think about what he called the meaning of memory. And the meaning of memory was really how it was thanks to the Hibakusha and the atomic bomb survivors' willingness to keep visiting that darkest place, that darkest memory, and to share that with the world. And his fear at that time, 40 years after the bomb, was what will happen when there are no more Hibakusha left to save us from ourselves. And 80 years have passed, and Beatrice Finn always spoke about these small victories. The reality that another atomic bomb has not been used in 80 years is a massive victory, but many days were small victories of no further use of the atomic bomb since 1945. And I think it is our job to kind of break the wall of otherness. I think Iran is happening because of how America and the West and much of the world has looked at Muslim people and the people of the Middle East, and especially behind the Colin Powell and the Iraq wars of the Bush family. I think there's been a huge loss to our world, a respect of darker skinned people of the Middle East. Some of the oldest traditions of math and science are being squandered and lost in this time. And I think similar to the Japanese people, we do not see the Middle Eastern people as brothers, as sisters sometimes. And I think we lack that respect for the other. And I think that John Hersey's Hiroshima went a long way at that time to allow us to see the Japanese people just after war as if they were our neighbor or our priest or our doctor or our seamstress. And I think that in this time, it is our job, as artists and filmmakers and pop culture makers, we work to tell the biggest story, to tell that human story so people can relate and remember. And it was a great privilege to work with ICAN and in making that sculpture with Akira Fujimoto, my Japanese collaborator. Then to make the Future Memory artwork series that we continue to make. We just finished a 4.5 foot by 4.5 foot bronze of a piece of wood impacted by the atomic bomb at Hiroshima that's being delivered to Miami. And I would say that the world is more open to the stories of Hiroshima and of the atomic bomb survivors from all over the world now than ever. And we're seeing, continued growth of travel to Hiroshima. The Metropolitan Museum, curator of Japanese art, will bring the first major group of 30 people to Hiroshima this October. And they've never brought a tour to Hiroshima like that ever before. And they said it was on the backs of Oppenheimer, the popular culture change that demanded. And whether we like some of what was not said or not, it has brought a lot more awareness to the table. And so we should still stand behind the Grannies for Peace and stand behind all the scientists working in the space, but but the movement is growing. And so let's hold on to each other, and let's find ways to collaborate. And it's an honor to hear you speak and to tell your story, Tad. And long live John Hersey High School, which brought
Well,
Tad and I together.
Yes,
but
Cannon,
yeah,
let me
great to
just
be here
jump
with
in
all of you.
quickly. And yes, Melissa, that was a beautiful segue to Cannon, but I wanted to introduce him. And yeah, I don't think you know this, Melissa, because as Cannon just mentioned, I happen to be a graduate of John Hersey High School in Arlington Heights, Illinois. And,
Wow.
it's a lot better than Wichita High School or Maine West High School or something. And I just want to make sure everyone knows, because you and I and Melissa Cannon may know more about your grandfather than everyone here does. John Hersey was the Pulitzer. He'd already won a Pulitzer Prize, and he was a 30-something, a writer for the New Yorker magazine, and he just decided to go to Japan and walk around Hiroshima and talk to the survivors. And he wrote these beautiful long dispatches for the New Yorker magazine. And Cannon and Melissa, the thing that strikes me most about it is there was nothing in there about, did President Truman make the right decision or the wrong decision? This eternal debate that has gone on for 80 years. John Hersey just told Americans, this is what we did. This is what an atom bomb does. And if we fall into this trap of a permanent arms race and nuclear deterrence, this is what atomic weapons are going to inevitably do again and again to human beings, and perhaps ultimately to the human race as a whole. And your grandfather, Cannon, died in, I think it's 1993, if I'm remembering right, but 6 years later was the turn of the century, and the School of Journalism at NYU did a ranking of the most important works of journalism of the 21st century, and John Hersey was number one. They said it was the single most important.
I was asked to be there, and there were 65 of the world's top journalists, and I accepted the award on his behalf. And I spoke about the corporatization of the media and how we've really lost the potential. Not that in that time it wasn't the same way. I mean, he worked for Time through the war. And it was only because the New Yorker was such an independent published magazine that such an article would be, a risk would be taken on an article like Hiroshima, which was published as one full edition, because they knew if they tried to make a second edition, it would be shut down, and it was likely they wouldn't get the whole story out. So they made a mock-up, a fake issue, as if it was going to be something else, and then slipped in the edition that only the publisher, the editor, and John Hersey worked on privately, in secret. And my family went into hiding 2 days before the publishing with 3 kids and my grandmother and grandfather in the hills of North Carolina. And, they didn't know what would happen, because there had been a presidential decree to not tell the human story of the atomic bomb only 3 weeks before the publishing of Hiroshima. And when we did a Freedom of Information request, we found that the government had been tracking John Hersey and 9 other journalists who had left Asia. In the FOIA, we found that, but nothing else. All the other material about Hiroshima is still fully confidential and not released to the public. So, it was when my father spoke about it for the only time ever on camera with us, he said, the CIA was regularly stopping by after Hiroshima. And also the next major book my grandfather wrote was the first major book on the Holocaust, was called The Wall. So he stayed in the work. And then very much on racial justice and the internment camps. He continued to work on these types of issues throughout his life. So I think that we have to give power to more journalists in these times. We have to tell stories of truth tellers and heroes like Kiyoshi Tanimoto, like the Hibakusha survivors, but also people like John Hersey and Beatrice Finn and Melissa Parke and people who are making a difference in the world in this time in this way. And so I praise this type of conversation, because we don't have enough honest opportunities to share pathways to peace or pathways to what is needed, which is really like a movement of movements, like the alignment of the climate movement and the non-anti-nuclear and the peace movement, and is the only way, because there's no greater destruction to the climate than war. And there's no greater horrifying symbol of war than the nuclear bomb. So I think to tie those together is to build a much more popular movement. And so I support that fully.
Well, Canon Hersey, thank you so much for being my surprise guest today. And your eloquence matches your grandfather's. So, folks, visit John Hersey High School if you ever find yourself in suburban the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Go read John Hersey's Hiroshima and his other writings. And please Google Canon Hersey or put a website, Canon, in the chat if you'd like to.
Sure.
Because Canon Hersey, as you folks have just heard, is carrying on this work with eloquence and passion. I also want people to check out the website of ICAN, ICANW.org, which Melissa and Seth told us is the road to a nuclear weapon-free world. So it's 6:32, and I want to let people go, anyone, including my guests. I can certainly stay on for another 10 or 15 minutes if people have some more to say, because I do want to say this. I see furious conversations going on in the chat, some very vivid exchanges and disagreements. And if anybody wants to raise their hand and offer either whatever kind of substantive comment about the rule, about the topic, or a closing comment, please do. Do it now, because otherwise we'll wrap up. And then I will still kind of waiting for hands to go up. And if you don't want to raise your hand, that's cool, because we're going to save this chat. And this chat is, I've only seen bits and pieces of it, but it's been a very rich exchange, and that inspires me that people bring both knowledge and passion and conviction to this kind of conversation about where we go from here.
Tad,
yes, Dr. Parke.
May I ask a simple question? Melissa mentioned that that Israel has never opened itself to inspection of its weapons. Has the United States ever done it? Did Iran actually open themselves up in the last few years? And what about any other countries in the world? What nations have actually opened themselves up to inspection?
Melissa, Seth, I'm sure you have something to say, but I'd like to take a stab at this first. I have a lot of exhibits over here. I've just been kind of clipping things from the newspaper. And this is so here's indulge me on this. It's a direct answer to your question, Nancy. The headline is Iran to suspend cooperation with Watchdog, the Watchdog being the IAEA. Very much about the inspections you're asking about. But then there was this sentence, just kind of buried in the middle of the article. The NPT has countries, I'm quoting now, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has countries agree not to build or obtain nuclear weapons and allows the IAEA to conduct inspections to verify that countries correctly declare their programs. So there's this thing called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Dr. Parke. And I think the number is 100 and I'd have to look it up. I think it's something like 187.
190 now.
Is that right? 190.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Seth. I was pretty close. 190 states parties to the NPT?
Yeah, I think so.
But okay, so 185 is the number I was after, because 185 of those countries have committed to not acquire nuclear weapons and to open themselves. That's right. They have none, and they've committed to open themselves up to inspections. But the other five, the original five nuclear armed nations, United States, Soviet Union, now Russia, China, Britain, and France, this is what wasn't in that paragraph. They have agreed to get rid of theirs. The NPT was a bargain. And if you'll indulge me, I'll reach over there and I'll wave my own book here, the one book I've published, Apocalypse Never, The Road to Abolishing Nuclear Weapons Forever, because there's a chapter in there called The NPT for Dummies. So many people just see that paragraph and they think that's what the NPT does. It's nations committing to never acquiring nuclear weapons, leaving out that the nuclear armed nations promised that eventually someday they would get rid of theirs and open themselves up to the same kinds of nuclear inspections that Iran and the other 185 non-nuclear signatories have committed to do. So that's the world we're aiming for, is that the TPNW, Seth and Melissa, might be seen as the way to the fulfillment of the grand bargain of the NPT, as yet unfulfilled. Nancy, you're the moderator, but I see James Galbraith has his hand up. Are you Professor James Galbraith or a different James Galbraith?
Yes. Thank you.
You are. I'm very happy. Your name is well known to me, Professor, and I'm very happy to have you with us today.
Just a little history with ADA over the years. But I just wanted
and excuse me, Professor, thank you for reminding me of that. Your father, John Kenneth Galbraith, was one of the founders of this organization, Americans for Democratic Action. Thank you for carrying that torch.
I just wanted to chime in a little bit on this question of the NPT, because it also guarantees the signatories, the 185 who have given up nuclear weapons, the right to a peaceful development of nuclear power for electrical purposes and other purposes, medical purposes, and therefore also to enrich uranium up to the point that's necessary under IAEA supervision. And Iran is building nuclear reactors at Bushehr. The Russians are building them to supply their civilian needs for electricity. That is guaranteed. Iran has a very reasonable basis for suspecting that the IAEA became a conduit for information about the location and nature of their facilities to make them vulnerable to military attack. And for that reason, not unreasonably, it has removed itself from supervision. So what Israel was attempting to do, since Israel knew very well that the IAEA had accounted for every gram of enriched uranium that Iran had, and there was no nuclear weapons program, as Iran has been saying for decades, that there wasn't such a program. Its purpose was to try to overthrow the Iranian state. It failed to do that, and what it actually hit with its bombs was the NPT itself. I don't think that means that Iran is going to build a weapon, but it does mean that Iran will now proceed without further supervision from the IAEA and to the NPT's guarantee that you can go ahead and do this without fear of attack on your facilities is no longer credible. So that's what we lost with this. I don't really think the US bombing made much difference to all of this, except it brought the whole business to a quick end by essentially pretending to destroy a program that didn't exist. Okay, the narrative there is a bit twisted, but it achieved its purpose, and the war came to a pretty quick end with the pantomime of the Iranian retaliation on the US base. So to me, that's the much less interesting part of this than what Israel actually achieved, which was to destroy the NPT regime.
Melissa, Seth, do you have anything that you'd like to say about that? Thank you, Professor Galbraith. And we're happy to have you at any ADA event anytime.
Yeah, I thought that was a very profound analysis, and I agree. I think with basically everything you said, James. I also agree with you, Tad, and your response to Nancy's question. I would just add that in addition to those 185 states that have accepted some form of inspections, there have been inspections of even the U.S. and Russia, Nancy, in the context of bilateral disarmament agreements such as New START. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with New START, but just to remind you, in case it's slipping off your radar, that this is the last sort of constriction on U.S. and Russian expansion of nuclear weapon systems that's in force, and it expires on February 5th of 2026. And so I think that's 200 something days, 210 days, I believe we have left.
Thanks for giving us something else to worry about.
To preserve that last constraint. and it's been through this that we've had U.S. military visit Russian nuclear facilities and inspect the disarmament. And so when Melissa said, earlier that the Israel is the only state in certainly in the region that has not taken on inspections. I mean, that's really true. There's even some other nuclear armed states that have these kind of constraints, and Israel's the only country that has not even admitted that they have the weapons to begin with.
Dr. Naparka, why don't we call on Dr. Sheftsov?
Yes.
And then I think I will invite Seth and Melissa if they wish to make any kind of closing comment. And then I have one myself. And I thank everyone for this very vigorous, rich exchange.
Yeah, I have another question that's maybe pretty basic, but it didn't come up. Given that the Non-Proliferation Treaty does, at least in its text, obligate nuclear weapons powers to give up their weapons, what is the fundamental difference between the TPNW and the existing Non-Proliferation Treaty?
I love that question. I don't know who should take, if it's okay if I give the first crack. I just got excited about it. Yeah, I mean, so that's such an important point to clarify for those who aren't steeped in the overall architecture of all these treaties. It is true that the NPT, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the one that most of the world belongs to, has an Article 6 that says that all of the parties agree to, and the language is a little strange, but it's something like pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to the cessation of the arms race and to nuclear disarmament, I believe, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. So there is the obligation to disarm for the possessor states, right? But it was never contemplated that would be the end of that would be the entire treaty infrastructure. It was always contemplated that then more agreements would be made to bring that about, and that could be, that was very open-ended what that could look like. And so the function of the TPNW is it is that treaty. It is that treaty that actually builds a structure for how Article 6 will be fulfilled, how of the NPT, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, is the way that we get there, and because it builds it details both what's prohibited, and then builds a structure for how these weapons will be verifiably dismantled and eliminated. It is often said that the NPT is the cornerstone of the nuclear weapons legal framework. It's like every country that walks into the NPT meetings pulls out the statement that they gave last year and says always somewhere in their statement that the NPT is the cornerstone. And that's hopefully true. I mean, as Professor Galbraith was saying, that we may have fundamentally destroyed the NPT by attacking Iran. And hopefully that's not true. But in any case, it has been, for all of its flaws and all of it, what it can't do, it has been the centerpiece, or as they say, cornerstone of this entire treaty architecture. But the way I often think of it is like, that's great. I mean, but the cornerstone isn't the whole house, and who's going to build the rest of it? And so if the NPT is the cornerstone of the house, then I think we see the TPNW as the capstone or of the house, or the keystone, the one that completes it. That's the treaty that actually will bring us to a world without nuclear weapons. Whereas the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons primarily has served a different purpose in the end.
Thank you.
I love the question, and I love your answer as well. So thank you very much. I don't want to keep folks forever, and we're 15 minutes over time. Seth, may I take that as your closing comment? You're welcome to make another, and I want to invite you Melissa to make a closing comment, and then I hope people will tolerate my own. And I just really thank folks, for this vigorous conversation and the vigorous. I'm looking forward to reading all the chat, and it really shows that maybe we've gotten through that for all the other things we have to worry about in this world, especially with the new administration in Washington at the moment. This remains number one. This is the single greatest. I used to work for Senator Alan Cranston, as I think you know, Melissa, and others do. At the very end of his life, working exclusively on nuclear weapons abolition. And when people weren't paying much attention, he just would say, if a single atom bomb goes off in a single city in the world, all of a sudden, all other issues will instantly become trivial by comparison. So that, let alone the civilization-ending omnicide bringing about global thermonuclear war, is what we are here to forestall. Melissa Parke?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to say that, just repeat the final part of the 5-point message I spoke about earlier, that disarmament is achievable, that the antidote to a sense of helplessness or hopelessness is action and connectedness, working with others to take actions, and to note what writer Yuval Noah Harari said, and he said, talks about the power of human imagination to redirect our ingenuity from self-destruction to self-creation. And I think that's what the TPNW is showing us that we can do, and we are doing. And I think we can all play a part in bringing about the end of nuclear weapons. And thank you for your interest and attention this evening.
Seth?
I'm happy to leave it at that.
I guess I have one more thing to say. I can't stop myself. I'm sure a few people will raise their hands yes but many people will not when I ask if you've ever heard of a city called Kokura. Kokura. It is a city in Japan. It is medium size. It has a little town square and suburbs and sort of average sort of architecture. And it is very much like almost every city of that type in the world, except for one thing that makes Kokura utterly unique in all of human history. Because this is a story that not a whole lot of people know. On August 9th, 1945, Kokura was the target. Nagasaki was not the target. Kokura was the target. And these B-29s came and they couldn't see. They couldn't see the city. 50% because of bad weather, 50% because of smoke from American bombing raids 20 or 30 miles away 2 or 3 days earlier. And I just want you to think about that moment. These people in this city just going about their lives, kind of a cloudy day overhead, having no knowledge of the fact that there was a B-29 carrying an atom bomb, making long sweeps over the city, trying to find an opening to drop that bomb. And they didn't. And so they went on to Nagasaki. And as we all know, they dropped the bomb on Nagasaki instead. Kokura escaped its nuclear fate totally by a roll of the dice, totally by the fates of the heavens, totally by just an extreme unfolding of chance. And I guess I would like to submit that 80 years on, the human race is in the same predicament. Somehow we have escaped other atom bombs going off and the civilization-ending global thermonuclear war that people of my age grew up with throughout the Cold War. And we're not going to escape it forever. This pathway that Seth and Melissa have laid out for us today is the only conceivable pathway to bringing about the abolition of nuclear war, and then that general and complete disarmament, Seth, that you reminded me is part of Article 6 of the NPT. We cannot live with these things on this planet indefinitely. And to go back to my opening comment, we surely can't survive indefinitely by people appointing themselves as Thor with the great hammer, and we're going to decide who can be trusted with them and who cannot be trusted with them. Of this great specter, which again has haunted humanity for 80 years now. Let us all commit ourselves to bring about the abolition of nuclear weapons, and then for humanity to work together collectively to tackle all these other existential challenges so we can bring about a world of peace, a world of justice, a world of hope for all 8 billion Earthlings. And I guess that's what I want to close with. Thank you for letting me do my kokara. And why don't we say goodbye? Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Last chance to post websites in the chat. We'll keep it on for another minute. We are adasocal.org. Maybe somebody can quickly post that. The national site is adaction.org. And of course, we have the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICANW.org. Let's all collaborate together to create the future that we all deserve.
Thank you.
Melissa, Seth, thank you very much, folks. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for
See
having
you
us.
on the ramparts. See you on the ramparts, folks.
Thank you, Tad and Melissa and Seth.
Okay, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Recording will stop.